My grandfather's journals revealed he'd been communicating with the family of Bigfoot for over 30 years, and what they told him about the U.S. government makes me afraid to even write these words. I've spent the last 3 weeks debating whether to share this information publicly, knowing that doing so might put me in danger, or worse, lead others to what remains of these extraordinary beings. But some truths can't stay buried, especially when lives hang in the balance. My name is Dr. Eleanor Hayes, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Pacific Northwest University. 2 months ago, my grandfather, Dr. William Hayes, passed away at age 89, leaving me his remote cabin in the Olympic Peninsula wilderness. My grandfather was no ordinary man. He was a respected wildlife biologist who spent 40 years with the Department of Forestry, publishing extensively on black bear migration patterns and wolf pack behaviors in Washington state. The scientific community regarded him as methodical, rational, and above all, credible. I knew him as a gentle soul, with weathered hands and eyes that seemed to hold the entire forest within them. "The woods have secrets, Ellie," he'd tell me during summer visits. "Some of them are better left undisturbed." I never understood what he meant until last Thursday. I was cleaning out the cabin, sorting through decades of field notes and equipment, when my boot caught on an odd seam in the wooden floor. The plank shifted, revealing a small brass handle. My heart quickened. My grandfather, practical in every aspect of his life, wasn't the type to have hidden compartments. The handle lifted a 3-foot section of floorboard, exposing a metal box nestled in the darkness beneath. Inside were 13 leather-bound journals, 6 microcassette tapes, and a sealed manila envelope containing what appeared to be hair samples and a series of black and white photographs. The first journal was dated June 14, 1967. My hands trembled as I read the opening entry, written in my grandfather's precise, measured handwriting. First visual confirmation today, A547 hours. Coordinates 47 Diguan 32.8, in 123 Dictatory 3 Puan. Elevation 3,040 feet. Subject approximately 8'2", tall, estimated weight 650, 750 lbs, covered in dark auburn fur. Bipedal gait with 6'4" stride length. Prominent sagittal crest visible. Subject observed from distance of approximately 85 yards through Zeiss 10x42 binoculars for a duration of 4.3 minutes before retreating into dense forest cover. Footprints documented: 17.5 inches in length, 8.3 inches at widest point, 5 distinct toe impressions. This is no bear. Accompanying the entry was a detailed sketch of an enormous footprint, meticulously measured and annotated. The precision was characteristic of my grandfather, but the subject matter left me breathless. Bigfoot. My grandfather, the empirical scientist, the man who scoffed at cryptozoologists, had documented a Bigfoot sighting with the same clinical detachment he'd use for cataloging salamander species. I spent that entire night reading, the cabin's kerosene lamp casting long shadows as I pored over journal after journal. The entries progressed from clinical observation to something more profound. By October 1967, he was documenting multiple sightings, patterns of movement, behavior during different weather conditions. He'd created a map of the creature's territory, noting seasonal variations and preferred foraging locations. What struck me most was a recurring symbol in the margins, a simple curved line intersected by 3 shorter lines. It appeared first in November 1967, then with increasing frequency in subsequent entries. By February 1968, my grandfather had begun a separate notation system, tracking what he called communication attempts. Subject responds to similar sounds when replicated, he wrote on March 3, 1968. Low-frequency vocalizations, 38-42 Hz, elicit approach behavior rather than retreat, Subject left 3 stones in perfect line at Site 4 after I departed yesterday. Intentional communication? Must test further. The final entry of the first journal, dated April 17, 1968, made my skin prickle. Communication established. Subject is not animal. Cognitive capacity evidently far beyond any known non-human primate. God help me, I don't know who to tell. They'd never believe me, or worse, they would. When I looked up from the journal, dawn was breaking over the mountains. I found myself staring at the tree line, wondering if I was being watched the way my grandfather had been all those years ago. The second journal was thicker than the first, filled with what appeared to be a developing lexicon of symbols, sounds, and their apparent meanings. There were pressed leaves arranged in patterns, rubbings of strange markings found on trees, coordinates of meeting sites. But what caught my eye was a folded paper tucked into the back cover, a photograph. The image was grainy, taken in low light at what appeared to be dusk. But unmistakably standing half concealed by a massive cedar was a figure too large to be human, too upright to be bare. One enormous hand rested against the tree trunk. The other held what appeared to be a small branch extended toward the camera. On the back of the photograph, my grandfather had written a single sentence. First contact. He's trying to tell me something. Little did I know then how disturbing those messages would become. I spent the next 3 days immersed in my grandfather's journals from 1967 to 1973, barely stopping to eat or sleep. The cabin's isolation, once unsettling, now felt protective. These weren't the ramblings of a man who'd spent too much time alone in the wilderness. They were the meticulous recordings of a scientist documenting what might be the most significant anthropological discovery of the century. My grandfather's approach had been systematic from the beginning. After the initial sightings, he created a series of controlled experiments to establish communication. The second journal detailed his construction of a wooden instrument, a hollow tube with adjustable chambers that could replicate the low-frequency sounds he'd recorded from the creature. He called it a wood horn and included precise measurements, 42 inches long, with 3 sound chambers of varying diameters. March 12, 1969. Attempted vocalization pattern recorded on February 27th. 3 long tones, 8 seconds each, at 40 Hz, followed by 2 short tones at 52 Hz. Repeated at 15-minute intervals for 1 hour, beginning at 05:15. At 06:40, received response from ridge approximately 200 yards east of position. Response mimicked pattern precisely, but added a descending tone at conclusion. Significance unknown. Temperature 38 degrees, light precipitation, wind NNW at 4 Mach. The entries that followed showed my grandfather leaving small food offerings, first berries, then dried meat, eventually more substantial items like whole salmon or bread. Each offering was documented with the precision of a controlled experiment. Item, weight, placement, time left, and most importantly, what was taken and what was left in return. June 8, 1970, left 2.3 kg of fresh salmon on flat rock at Site 7. Returned June 9th to find salmon gone. In its place, arrangement of 7 pine cones in perfect line, oriented north to south, with smooth river stone at northern end. This is the 4th such arrangement. But first with the stone marker. Testing hypothesis that stone indicates directionality. The rock arrangements became more complex over the following months. My grandfather mapped them, photographed them, eventually recognizing patterns that corresponded to landmarks, water sources, and what he believed were territory boundaries. By 1971, he was confident these weren't random acts, but deliberate communication. I found a sealed envelope between the pages documenting July 1971. Inside was a pressed salal leaf with distinct markings, 5 parallel lines pressed into its surface. My grandfather's note read, "Not deer teeth, not bear claw, tool marks, intentional." The breakthrough came in spring 1972. My grandfather had begun drawing simple symbols in the dirt near his offerings: a circle for the sun, a wavy line for water, an upright line with branches for trees. The responses became increasingly sophisticated. April 18, 1972. Left. Usual offering with circle symbol. Returned to find circle had been modified. Smaller circle drawn inside with 12 marks around perimeter. Moon cycles, calendar system. Most significant, new symbol beside modified circle. Unmistakable crude drawing of human figure with straight lines radiating from it. Appears threatening. Attempting interpretation. I found the first of the microcassette tapes tucked into the journal covering late 1972. My hands trembled as I located my grandfather's old tape player among his belongings and pressed play. The first sounds were ambient forest noise, wind through pines, distant bird calls. Then my grandfather's voice, hushed but clear. November 4th, 1972, I05:10 hours. Usual location. A long pause, then the sound that made my skin prickle. A deep, resonant call that started low and swelled, vibrating with harmonics impossible for a human throat to produce. It lasted nearly 20 seconds before tapering to silence. Then, unmistakably, my grandfather replicated the sound with his wooden instrument. The forest fell silent. 30 seconds passed before a response came, the same pattern, but with variations at the end, almost like a question. My grandfather's voice again, barely a whisper. That's the third exchange. He's staying longer each time. By 1973, the journals documented a rudimentary language developing between my grandfather and the creature he'd begun referring to as forest elder. They had established over 40 shared symbols and sound patterns relating to weather, food sources, territorial markers, and danger warnings. The final pages of the 1973 journal contained a revelation that made me set the book down and walk outside for air. My grandfather had drawn a complex series of symbols that filled an entire page, his most complete translation attempt yet. Below it, in shaky handwriting unlike his usual precise script, first coherent message, received over 3 separate exchanges, translated to best of ability. Men come with loud sticks, forest elder hide family. Men take others before. Men return always. You different man, you help warn? I stood on the cabin porch as a cold rain began to fall, staring at the dense wall of trees surrounding the property. My grandfather hadn't just found a rare animal. He'd made contact with an intelligent, communicative species that had been hiding from humans, hiding from something they feared. And now, through these journals, I was being drawn into their hidden world. On the porch railing, I noticed something that hadn't been there that morning. 3 small stones arranged in a perfect triangle with a pine needle pointing east. The journals spanning 1973 to 1981 revealed how my grandfather's relationship with Forest Elder deepened beyond simple communication into a profound connection between 2 intelligent beings. The early pages showed my grandfather's growing excitement as their symbolic language became more complex. March 15, 1974. Elder has created new method of communication. Found arrangement of colored stones, leaves, and bark pieces in pattern that corresponds to local terrain. Blue stones for water sources, green leaves for dense forest, bark strips for ridge lines. Remarkable spatial accuracy. When I added small stick figure at my location, Elder moved it to correct position during night. He understands maps. my grandfather began documenting Bigfoot social structures through elders' communications. Using stones to represent individuals, elders showed my grandfather that they lived in family groups of 4-7, with territories spanning about 50 square miles. Elder's own family consisted of himself, a female partner, and 2 younger ones, possibly his children. In winter 1975, my grandfather described a breakthrough when Elder allowed him to observe from a hidden position as 3 Bigfoot gathered to feed on salmon from a frozen stream. His notes captured both scientific observation and genuine wonder. December 18, 1975. Temperature 28°, light snow. Observed from blind at coordinates marked on map. 3 subjects, Elder, 8'2", adult female, 7'5", juvenile, aprax 6, complex social interaction. Juvenile given first access to food. Female and elder used crude tools. Sharpened sticks to break ice. Flat stones to clean fish. Shared food methodically. Vocalizations varied. At least 12 distinct sounds with apparent meanings. They use tools. They teach their young. They share. My God, they're so much like us. The photos I found from this period were blurry but compelling. Massive shadows moving between trees. A large hand reaching for a fish. The back of a head showing a distinctive crest. My grandfather had been careful never to photograph their faces directly, a sign of growing respect. By 1977, Elder began leaving more disturbing messages. My grandfather's translations described encounters with men with thunder sticks, likely guns, and metal birds, helicopters. Elder's family had been forced to move their sleeping site 3 times in one season due to human encroachment. July 8, 1977. Elder extremely agitated today. Left arrangement showing men entering territory from south. Added broken sticks in pattern that indicates danger, death. When I asked for clarification using our symbol system, response suggested someone was taken or killed. First time Elder has communicated something this urgent. My grandfather's handwriting changed during this period, becoming more rushed, sometimes returning to English mid-entry as if he couldn't maintain his scientific distance. His inner conflict about publishing his findings became evident. October 3, 1978. Patterson footage discussed again at department meeting. Colleagues laughed it off as obvious hoax. How could I tell them I've spent a decade documenting a family of what they're ridiculing? Publication would bring attention, researchers, hunters, elders' trust would be betrayed. Science demands sharing knowledge, but at what cost to them? The most chilling entry came in spring 1979, when my grandfather noted unusual helicopter activity over the forest. The next day, he found Elder waiting at their meeting place for the first time ever, clearly distressed. April 17, 1979. Elder led me to ridge overlooking valley. Men in unmarked black vehicles at old logging road. Elder made sign for capturing, then family sign. I promised to investigate. Need contact in Forest Service or military to determine what operation is underway. Elder refuses to return to normal territory until men with boxes leave. When I checked my grandfather's official work logs from this period, there was a 2-week gap marked simply personal leave. The journal revealed he had spent this time camping near the site, documenting vehicle movements and taking photos of men in unmarked uniforms, setting up what appeared to be tracking equipment. My hands shook as I found a sealed envelope containing a Polaroid photo showing a military-type truck partially hidden under camouflage netting, with coordinates and date written on the back. This wasn't just a scientific discovery anymore. My grandfather was documenting something sinister. By 1981, Their communication had become sophisticated enough that Elder began sharing history, not just recent events, but stories passed down through generations. Using their symbol system, Elder conveyed that his kind had once been numerous throughout the forests, living in large family groups. But over decades, their numbers had dwindled as humans expanded their reach. The final entry of this period contained a crude map drawn by Elder, showing locations where his people had been taken over the years. My grandfather had overlaid it with a standard topographic map, adding dates and notes where he could verify unusual government or military activity in those same areas. The last line sent chills down my spine. "I'm being followed. Someone knows. Found boot prints circling cabin yesterday while I was meeting Elder. Camera trap triggered at 2:30 a.m. Will store journals in floor safe. If you're reading this and I'm gone, be careful who you trust." I looked out the window at the darkening forest. The wind had picked up, and a light rain tapped against the glass. Something moved at the edge of the tree line, probably just a deer. Probably. The journals from 1981 to 1987 revealed a darker history than I could have imagined, chronicling not just isolated incidents, but what appeared to be a systematic pattern of violence against Bigfoot spanning decades. My grandfather's entries became more urgent, his handwriting occasionally slanting with emotion as he documented Elder's revelations. February 18, 1982. Used our symbol system to ask Elder about his earliest memories of humans. Response devastating. Elder indicated his original family group numbered 16 individuals. Drew timeline showing reduction to just 3 by the time he reached maturity. Used our death symbol with the man with stick figure repeatedly. They've been hunted, deliberately and systematically. My grandfather had begun translating Elder's communications into a cohesive historical narrative, using symbols they'd developed, but adding his own interpretations. The translations filled dozens of pages, detailing how Bigfoot had once ranged widely across the northwest forests before being forced into increasingly remote areas. Most disturbing were Elder's accounts of organized capture operations. My grandfather's notes from June 1983 contained a detailed transcription. Elder describes men in matching clothes coming at night with bright lights and sleep smoke, gas. His brother and cousin taken while the family slept in cave. Metal birds, helicopters overhead, mesh nets. Cousin escaped 3 days later, returned with strange marks on skin and metal thing in neck that Elder's mother removed. Cousin died soon after. This happened in time of Elder's father's youth, approximately 1950s. The journals included a map unlike anything I'd ever seen. A standard geological survey overlaid with colored markers indicating Bigfoot sighting clusters, followed by sudden disappearances. My grandfather had meticulously added data from newspaper archives, military training exercises, mining operations, forest fires, and unexplained phenomena. The pattern was undeniable. In areas with multiple Bigfoot sightings, there would follow either a natural disaster, a military exercise, or a mining accident, after which sightings would cease entirely in that region. October 4th, 1984, cross-referenced Elder's accounts with newspaper archives from County Library. 1953, forest fire in Olympic Peninsula that burned 8,000 acres correlates exactly with Elder's story of his extended family group being driven from ancestral territory. No lightning strikes recorded that week. Fire origin listed as undetermined. Similar pattern repeated in 6 other locations between 1947 to 1972. My grandfather had collected newspaper clippings, carefully preserved in plastic sleeves. One from 1968 showed a small article about unusual wildlife deaths near Mount Baker, with a quote from a Forest Service spokesman about unidentified toxic substances, possibly from military testing. My grandfather had circled the article and written 3 weeks after multiple Bigfoot reports in same area. By 1985, my grandfather's paranoia had grown. Several entries mentioned cars parked at the forest access road, footprints around his cabin when he returned from trips, and the sense of being watched. He began using code words for locations and varying his meeting times with Elder. March 15, 1985. Someone has been in the cabin. Nothing obviously taken, but papers on desk rearranged. Field glasses moved from east window to west. Elder refuses to come near cabin now, says he can smell wrong men have been here. Meeting at alternate location only from now on. A sealed envelope from this period contained several strands of hair labeled Subject to, female partner of Elder, with a note, DNA analysis performed by Dr. Marcus, unauthorized, off record. Results confirm. Primate, unknown species, definitely not human, definitely not known ape. Marcus destroyed samples after testing, but kept data. Says protein markers show evidence of genetic drift different from great apes. Estimated divergence minimum 700,000 years. The most chilling discovery was a series of photographs my grandfather had taken covertly during a wildlife survey that was actually a surveillance operation of his own. The images showed men in unmarked dark uniforms setting up equipment in a forest clearing. One photo captured what appeared to be a large cage being unloaded from a truck. July 28, 1986. Elder's warnings confirmed. Government operation underway in Sector 7. Heavy equipment. Personnel with military bearing but no insignia. Elder showed me hidden observation point. 4-man teams with tranquilizer guns and tracking equipment. Claimed to local landowners they're tracking bears for conservation study. No conservation study registered with department. My grandfather's final revelations from this period came from Elder's most detailed communication yet. The location of underground shelters where families of Bigfoot would hide during these operations. Using their symbol system, Elder had mapped 7 cave systems and deep ravines where they could remain undetected for weeks. November 12, 1987. Elder took unprecedented risk today. Led me to one of their shelter locations. Cave system extends 200+ feet into mountainside. Multiple chambers, natural spring inside. Evidence of long-term use, worn sleeping areas, food storage sections, even crude tools. Most remarkable, wall markings. Symbolic communication preserved on stone. Some markings clearly ancient, generations old. This isn't just a species, it's a culture with history, with knowledge passed down. And they're being exterminated without the world even knowing they exist. The journal ended with a single line that made my blood run cold. Someone was in the trees today watching our meeting. Not Elder's kind. Need to move journals to safer location. If anything happens to me, the evidence must survive. I closed the journal and looked at the darkening forest outside the cabin windows. For the first time, I noticed a small camera mounted on a nearby pine tree, partially hidden by branches. Its lens pointed directly at the cabin door. The final journals from 1987 to 1994 carried an urgency that made my hands tremble as I turned each page. My grandfather's neat handwriting had given way to hurried scrawls, often with passages written in the field rather than transcribed later at his desk. The content had shifted from scientific documentation to increasingly desperate warnings. February 3, 1988. Elder appeared unexpectedly at cabin window tonight. First time ever approaching structure. Extreme agitation. Used our emergency meeting signal. At rendezvous point, He communicated through our symbol system. Water sickness, young ones dying. Led me to stream 4.3 miles northwest of cabin, where I collected samples in sterilized containers. Water clear, but smelled faintly metallic. The next entry included laboratory results my grandfather had somehow obtained without official channels. February 17, 1988. Dr. Simmons analyzed water privately. Elevated levels of cadmium, 3.8 ppm, lead, 2.2 ppm, and compounds she couldn't identify without specialized equipment. Asked no questions when I said it was for personal research. Levels toxic for human consumption over extended period. Stream feeds into watershed for elders' primary territory. Page after page documented similar findings. Soil samples showing chemical contamination, water testing revealing heavy metals and synthetic compounds. Vegetation displaying unusual die-off patterns. My grandfather had meticulously mapped these findings against locations of military installations, mining operations, and what he termed blackout zones, areas where his Forest Service credentials were suddenly insufficient for access. Most disturbing were elders' increasingly urgent communications about the health effects on his kind. May 20th, 1989. Elders' youngest offspring showing symptoms, hair loss in patches, weight loss despite abundant food sources, lethargy. Elder believes water sickness responsible. Using our symbol system, he indicated 4 other families with similar afflictions, all downstream from the restricted area marked on map. This isn't coincidental. My grandfather had begun collecting hair and tissue samples whenever possible, fur caught on branches, material from sleeping areas, even what appeared to be blood from an injured Bigfoot that Elder had guided him to observe from a distance. He sent these to trusted colleagues claiming they were from unidentified wildlife for analysis. October 14, 1990. DNA analysis shows chromosomal abnormalities consistent with radiation exposure or chemical mutagenesis. Similar patterns to what was documented in wildlife near nuclear testing sites in the 1950s. Whatever is happening in the restricted area is causing genetic damage to everything downstream. The maps in these journals revealed a pattern too precise to be coincidence. A direct correlation between Bigfoot population decline and proximity to what my grandfather now openly called testing sites. He had created overlays showing gradual movement of Bigfoot families away from these locations over decades, retreating deeper into less accessible wilderness. Elders' warnings became increasingly specific. My grandfather recorded one particularly detailed communication from spring 1992. April 22, 1992. Elder described facility using our symbol language. Underground, many rooms, lights always on, men in white coverings, lab coats. His cousin taken there 30 years ago, never returned. Others taken since. Some returned changed, fearful, sick, marked with small wounds. Elder's father told him never to approach men with sleeping sticks, tranquilizer guns. Knowledge passed down through generations. Stay hidden or be taken to the cutting place. My grandfather's determination to document everything had become an obsession. He installed hidden cameras at strategic locations, collected physical evidence, and even risked trespassing into restricted areas to photograph unusual activities. One journal entry described a night expedition. July 8, 1993. Observed facility from ridge 0.8 miles distant. Security perimeter with motion sensors. Loading dock active between 100 or 300 hours. Large container transferred from truck to underground level. Container dimensions approximately 10^7, large enough to hold adult subject. Heard vocalizations that matched Elder's distress calls, not recordings, live subjects. Taking photos risked detection but necessary for documentation. The accompanying photographs showed a concrete structure built into a hillside, surrounded by security fencing with no identifying markings. Military-style vehicles were visible, but no insignia or license plates could be seen. By early 1994, my grandfather's entries showed he had made a decision that filled me with dread. February 28, 1994, can no longer stand by as witness only. Compiled evidence packet, water analysis, soil samples, DNA results, photographic documentation of facility and affected wildlife, maps showing correlation between restricted areas and population decline. Will present to Regional Director Peterson next week. Peterson worked with indigenous rights groups previously, might understand significance. The final entry, dated March 15, 1994, was brief. Peterson reaction unexpected. Claimed to be supportive, but asked to keep evidence packet overnight to review thoroughly. Noticed black sedan outside office when I left. Someone followed me halfway back to cabin. Meeting elder tomorrow to warn him family should relocate immediately. Will retrieve backup documentation from cave site and contact media outlets directly. My grandfather's journal ended there. With shaking hands, I unfolded the newspaper clipping I'd found tucked into the final pages. The headline was small, buried on page 12 of the local paper. Veteran Forest Service biologist dies in hiking accident. The brief article stated William Hayes, 58, had apparently fallen from a ridge while conducting wildlife surveys. His body was discovered by fellow rangers 3 days after he was reported missing. The article noted that his research materials were destroyed in a cabin fire the same night. I set down the journal and walked to the window. The camera I'd spotted earlier was gone. In its place was a small stack of 3 stones with a pine needle pointing west. Sleep eluded me that night. I sat on the cabin porch with my grandfather's journals stacked beside me, watching the tree line for movement, listening to every snapping twig and rustling leaf with new awareness. The question that kept circling my mind wasn't whether I believed my grandfather's documentation. The evidence was too meticulous, too consistent to dismiss. The real question was what to do with this knowledge. At dawn, I made my decision. First, I needed to verify key elements of my grandfather's claims independently. Second, I needed to determine if anyone was monitoring the cabin. The stone arrangement, 3 stones with a pine needle pointing west, matched exactly the emergency signal my grandfather had documented in his translation notes. Someone or something was trying to communicate. I packed essentials into a backpack, secured the journals in waterproof bags, and hid them in a hollow log 300 yards from the cabin, a hiding spot my grandfather had noted in his contingency plans. Then, I drove into town, constantly checking my rearview mirror for signs of surveillance. At the county library, I requested archives of local newspapers from 1990, 1995. The librarian's eyebrows raised slightly. "Researching your grandfather?" she asked, surprising me. Dr. Hayes was always in here looking through these same archives before he passed. Such a tragedy. I nodded, unsure how much to reveal. "Did you know him well?" "Well enough to know he wasn't careless on hiking trails," she said quietly, glancing around before continuing. 2 men came asking questions after his accident. Claimed to be from the Forest Service, but showed odd credentials. Wanted to know what materials he'd accessed, who he'd spoken with. She slid the archive box across the counter. "Your grandfather was a good man. Whatever he was investigating must have been important." The archives confirmed several events my grandfather had documented. Unexplained wildlife deaths in 1991 near the watershed he'd identified. a supposed military training exercise in 1993 that cordoned off 50 square miles of forest for 3 weeks. And, most tellingly, a small article about local residents reporting unusual sounds near the ridge where my grandfather supposedly fell, descriptions that match the vocalizations he'd recorded from Elder's family. When I returned to the cabin that evening, I knew immediately someone had been inside. Nothing obvious was disturbed, but the air felt different. A coffee mug had been moved from the left side of the sink to the right. My laptop, which I'd intentionally left open to innocuous research papers, had been closed. I made a show of preparing dinner, washing dishes, and getting ready for bed, all for potential watching eyes. At 2 a.m., I slipped out the bathroom window with a small pack and my grandfather's wooden sound instrument, heading west as the stone arrangement had indicated. After hiking 3 miles, I reached the coordinates where my grandfather had documented one of Elder's meeting locations, a small clearing beside a distinctive lightning-struck cedar. With trembling hands, I raised the wooden instrument to my lips and produced the sequence my grandfather had transcribed as peaceful approach, friend of Elder. The forest absorbed the sound. Nothing moved. I waited 15 minutes, then repeated the call. On my third attempt, a response came, faint but unmistakable. The same tonal pattern with the addition of a descending note at the end. The exact signature my grandfather had described Elder using. I followed the sound deeper into the forest, eventually reaching a small stream cutting through a ravine. The environmental devastation was immediately apparent. Dead vegetation along the banks, absence of normal forest sounds, a metallic smell tainting the air. I collected water samples in sterilized bottles I'd brought. A soft cracking sound made me turn. There, half hidden behind a massive Douglas fir, stood a figure that made my breath catch. Over 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, covered in dark auburn fur, exactly as my grandfather had described Elder. But this wasn't Elder. This individual was younger, with distinctive reddish markings around the face that matched photographs of Elder's offspring from my grandfather's later journals. We observed each other in silence. Then, with deliberate movements, the Bigfoot placed one enormous hand against the tree trunk and another against its chest, the gesture of home and self my grandfather had documented. I mirrored the movement, my heart pounding. The creature extended its arm, revealing a smooth stone in its massive palm. When I cautiously accepted it, I noticed markings etched into the surface, symbols from my grandfather's translation system. I recognized them immediately: danger, sickness, water, help. Using gestures from my grandfather's notes, I indicated I understood and would return. The Bigfoot watched me for another moment before melting into the forest with surprising grace for something so large. Back at my university lab a week later, the water analysis confirmed my fears. Chemical compounds consistent with experimental weapons development, pharmaceuticals not approved for public use, and radiation signatures that matched no natural source. Similar contamination appeared in plants, soil, and hair samples I'd collected near the stream. The evidence was irrefutable, but also unpublishable, at least in its complete form. I knew what had happened to my grandfather when he tried that approach. Instead, I began documenting the environmental contamination through legitimate academic channels, carefully omitting any mention of Bigfoot. I published papers on watershed toxicity in the Olympic Peninsula, collaborated with environmental advocacy groups on legal challenges to military land use, and quietly gathered allies in environmental protection agencies. Each month, I returned to the cabin, leaving offerings at the forest's edge: clean water, uncontaminated food, medicine. They're always gone by morning, sometimes replaced with arrangements of stones or plants that, using my grandfather's translation guide, express gratitude or share information about new contamination sites. I've never shared the complete truth about what lives in those forests. The coordinates, the meeting locations, the translation system, those remain secret, protected in my grandfather's journals, which now rest in a bank vault. If my environmental research leads to cleanup operations and restricted development in those areas, it benefits both humans and the hidden families watching from the trees. Yesterday, I found a new arrangement outside the cabin. 5 stones in a pattern my grandfather's notes translate as "Elder's child has child." Life continues in the deep forest, against all odds. My grandfather gave his life to protect their secret. I can do no less. Some truths aren't meant to be exposed. They're meant to be protected until the world is ready to receive them without destruction, following in knowledge's wake. Until that day comes, I'll be the guardian of this hidden world, just as my grandfather was before me.